My name is Aidan O'Hara, and I have some knowledge, not a total expert now, but some knowledge on Irish family names, or Gaelic family names. That would tick in the Scots as well. And in order to understand our names and how we got them, it's a great help to have the Gaelic. But if you don't, you can still follow what I hope will be made fairly clear in this short presentation. Now, I should say it's an enormous subject. We have a lot of names, all of them actually of great interest and lots of history behind them. So I'll deal with Irish names generally, and that will include, obviously, Longford names, because there are certain names that belong to Longford, which we know about, and I'll deal with some of them. Can't deal with all of them, but some of them, and explain the background. Now, I call the talk, Who Do You Think We Are? I could just as easily have said, Who do you think we were? And by that, it would mean that our names were different. We had different names entirely a couple of hundred years ago or several hundred years ago when the whole country was Gaelic speaking, the Irish language. And so they were changed. And in the process, I will tell you how we got our names in that form. So we'll go ahead to the reference to a book which is very useful about the way things were in Longford name-wise in the 1901 census. And David Leahy, in his book County Longford and Its People, extrapolated a lot of material from it, listed the names, all of the names, alphabetically. And here they are. The most common ones. Did you know the O'Reillys were the most common ones? You might have thought the O'Farrells or Farrells. Riley and O'Reilly. By the way, some people think because they have no O in front of their name, they're called Riley, that they're not the same as the O'Reillys. I've met people who think like that, but that shows a limited knowledge of who we are. So you have next are the Farrells and O'Farrells, 343. So those two names, the Rileys, which is really a Cavan name, a Breffni name, next door territory, they're dominant, but that was in 1901. Will it be changed today? It'll have changed, but possibly not all that much. Then you have the Kiernans or MacKiernans, and my great-grandmother was a MacKiernan from North Longford. Brady's, Kelly's, Kennys, Cormac's and McCormack's, and different spellings for McCormack. Then this is the next list of prominent names that we have in Longford. Going down to, can't go all the way down, but we'll finish up with this lot. I see Reynolds at the bottom there. I thought there would have been more Reynoldses. Maybe you did too. Murtaghs, of course, we know the Murtaghs, or Murtagh. And what else was there? Well, that's it, really. Now, Longford itself, the name is O'Farrell's landing place, Longford y Ariel. You aspirate the F and it becomes silent, y Ariel. And Fariel comes from the name Faragul, Fergal. The process of Anglicization is what changed our names. When the Normans came in, or the Anglo-Normans, they would insist of people using a form of the name that they could deal with, until, of course, they themselves became fluent in the Irish language. But then Dublin Castle in the Pale and Dublin in later years were insistent on the Irish becoming more Anglified in dress and appearance and names. So there's what you have. So the names are anglicized phonetically. O'Hara, for example, in Irish is just the same as it is in the English language, in the Irish language, O'Hara. And translations of the name, some doozy of translations, I can tell you, very strange ideas about what the names meant. We'll come to that in a moment. And then also, of course, mistranslations. Now, to show you what happened to our name, there is a Gaelic name, Macgiolachinic. Now, the Macgiolachinics, of course, I should tell you that it's a common name in Ireland, and there are so many versions of it that name alone has got 25, 26 and more anglicized versions. There's just some of them. We won't go through them all one by one, but it'll show you how ludicrous it can be. And the early days in Ireland, of course, way back in the distant past, there were fewer people. So people lived fairly isolated communities, and they had one name, they went by one name. That was the same all over the world, you could say, pretty well, certainly in Europe. And then Ireland became one of the very first countries in Europe, very early on, to use fixed surnames. That was in the 10th and 11th centuries. And one of the people involved in doing that was the High King of Ireland, Brian Boru, Brian Boerdive. His name was Brian Boerdive mac Kennetic. And Kennetic today would have been anglicised as Kennedy, I suppose. The first recorded fixed surname is O'Clery. Cleary. And it seems like that this is the oldest surname recorded anywhere in Europe. So there's a first for Ireland. It was noted in the Annals, which recorded the death of Tiernach O'Clery, Lord of Aine in County Galway. And the word itself, how did they get their name? From clérach, a person of unclair, the clergy, the Latin clericus, and Cleary with the O. That's the two forms it appears in, Cleary and O'Clery, and spellings vary, of course. And it's also as clerk, because a person who is a clerk or a clerk, Americans say clerk, we say clerk. That's what they spell. The C-L-E-R-K, that A sound appears in Derby, Clark there, Sarvis. What is she doing now? Oh, she's in Sarvis in a big house down the road. Vermin is, the cowboys would say in the novels by Zane Grey and others, you dirty low-down vermin. Well, that was a pronunciation, an old pronunciation, going back to Elizabethan and Shakespearean times. Vermin was varmin. Diversion, let's have a bit of diversion. And sergeant is always sergeant. That's how it's spelled. The names ourselves, we have an O, of course, sometimes Ua, both of which mean a descendant or a grandson of, a descendant of. And Ni names, well, Inian, Ni is a contraction of Inian, Inian E, so-and-so, the daughter of so-and-so, Inian E Ara. O surnames were predominantly everywhere pretty well, starting off with. Many of the names I'll use as examples of this are here in Longford. One of the names we have in Longford, for example, it's Hanlon. Why do I mention Hanlon and all these names starting with H, including O'Hara, my own name? Well, the name is from Anluin, and so we get O'Hanluin. And all names based on a name like Anluin and Ara and Anrachan, they always had an H inserted between the O and the following word. So there's what you get. Anrachan, O'Hara, Herity is another one. Irachtig. Now, O'Hirachtig, there's an H there too, and also the ending changes in the word. It's from Irachtach, which means a person of the assembly. Dáil Aidan and the Shannon is Irachtas Aidan. And you have also in Leitrim, in Longford, you have a name called Colreevy, and that is from Mac Cahal Ruiwi, because the word Riwach means grey, speckled, or brindled. So it would be grey Cahal. Grey Cahal. And what did they do with Cahal, by the way, in the Angles? They called him Charles to give him a respectable English name. But it's Cahal. That's what it is. So the Mac names, well, you have Mac. Now, Mag also appears, McGuinness, for example. Mag, the G appears in names. Too much to go into now, but just take it from me. It's the same as Mac. And then the form is written M-A-C, M-C, and also M apostrophe. And nicknames, Mac is son of course. Ineen Vic, Nick, the daughter of the son of. And Scots and Irish Macs, are they different? Some people, you'll hear them saying, well, of course, MAC for the Scots and MC for the Irish. No. In both Scotland and Ireland, both forms are used, MAC and MC. You have Gill names and Kill names. Lots of names in Ireland start with Gill, and of course, it's from Gilla. Gilla is a servant of Gilla, a servant or a devotee of, it depends. Macula Isa, you heard our former President Mary McAleese. That's Macula Isa. Maculaye is Gilday, and that's the son of the servant of God. Lots of saints' names and holy names used. And Gilchrist and Gilchrist, Maculachrist, son of the servant of Christ. And then Maculwiri, for example, the surname Kilmurray in Longford. I know people by that name, and you do too, I'm sure. And that is Maculwiri, the son of the servant of Mary. Lots of people whose name begins with Mull, and that's from Moyle, used mostly as a devotee or a servant of somebody, like the Gill is used servant or devotee of. Also chief of, believe it or not, and that appears as a chief form in Omwelanafa. Now I've come across that name here, Molanphy, spelt in two different ways there, but there are others. The spellings can vary widely. Chief of the storm or the tempest, that's what that comes from. Omwelveog or Omwelveog is Malloy, two different spellings there. The servant of the devotee of St. Mweog, and Mweog is Aidan. Mo-e-og, A being Hugh, or another form, the anglicized form of Aog, young Aidan, or Aegon, Aidan. Same name as Aidan, St. Aidan. Most Mac surnames, people's names starting with Mac, they are of a later date than the O surnames. And sometimes people like to stick an O in front of their name because it makes them more senior. That's a notion. He has notions about himself. That's what they do. Gorman is one of them. They're actually Mac Gorman, but a gentleman who went to the continent with a wild geese said, we're Gormans, we're very senior. Affectation, it's called. Now, how the Mac names came about? Well, that's what happened when an older sept, they broke up. An older surname, broke into septs, I should say. A family group broke away from the parent stock and they assumed new surnames in Mac branches. Donogha, for example. With an O, we get O'Donoghue or O'Donoghue, which gives us the O'Donohues, two different spellings, O'Donoghue, with the O and without the O. And I must emphasize that there are 7 septs of Donohues from Cork, or Kerry rather, up to Connacht and beyond up into Ulster. And here in North Longford and Cavan, we have the name Donoghue, and it's spelled usually in anglicised from D-O-N-O-H-O-E. Different entirely from those in Kerry. And a friend of mine in Longford was disappointed. She said, I always thought that we were Donohues from the famous Donohues of Kerry. No, you're the famous Donohues of Cavan and Breffni and Longford. The Donogha name is used also as a Mac form, Mac Donogha. Somebody called Donogha, or people called Donogha, more than one. So Mac, it also appears in that form, in the English form and anglicised form and in the Irish language form. It also comes up as Mac Gonogha. You aspirate the D. That's an anglicised phonetically as McConaughey, different spellings. McConkey, with and without the Mac, sometimes just as Conaghy. And also as MacDonaghy, different spelling in Irish, MacDonaghy, which is a northern name from around Derry, and that's Donaghy. You've heard the name Donaghy. The Dohertys now, another family, big family that broke up into septs. Not many septs, but certainly 2 notable ones. And one of the Dohertys, it's an Inishowen name. They were chiefs of Inishowen, and that's where I was born, incidentally. I have a Longford father and a Donegal mother. But the Dohertys, there was a man called David Doherty, or David O'Doherty. David or David, and depends on the Donegal pronunciation. And his people became MacDades in English, or MacDavid. So it depends on the pronunciation, how you say MacDavid, MacDavid, MacDavid. The O'Rourke's, they didn't break it into many different septs, but one of them was the Kiernans, or MacKiernans, from MacKiernan. My great-grandmother was one of the MacKiernans. You might ask yourself the question, why are there so many Murphys and Kellys, the most common names in Ireland, along with names like Sullivan and Riley and so on? Why? How come? What's the reason? Well, I'll tell you. The name Morocha was very common in Ireland. Brian Boru had a son Morcha, and that name appeared all over Ireland. So there are many descendants of people called Morcha. No connection at all. So that's why there's so many of them. Another name where you have just a couple of different clans called Ryan or Muel Rien from Tipperary and Limerick, and they're mostly from Tipperary and Limerick. But there's the odd one here and there, but not many. Sullivans, O'Sullivan, there are a number of O'Sullivan septs, mostly again Cork and Kerry, but there are some that are from elsewhere. Byrne is another name, by the way, that appears in Ireland. Again, different Burns. The one in Wicklow is O'Brien. I should have written that up for you. I forgot. But the Wicklow name appears in that form in Connacht. And the name is O'Byrne, O'Byrne in Ireland, O'Byrne. And it's from the Norse name, somebody called Bjorn. And it became O'Byrne. Interesting. It also appears, by the way, in an anglicised form as Burn, Burns, and ridiculously even as Byron. Byron would have been pronounced Biring, or Biren, or Beering even. Doyle, there are several Doyles, mostly, of course, from the one stock of Vikings. And O'Doyle, the dark foreigner, O'Doyle, different spelling in the old days, Ghail. Walsh, of course, is Branagh. Branagh is a Briton, a person from Britain. And of course, it appears in English, not commonly, but it's there. Brennock and Brannock and Brannock. That's an anglicised form of Brannock. O'Connors, there are several septs of O'Connors. Connacht being the big one. There's also a big clan of them in Ely or down in Offaly, that area of the centre of Ireland. Rileys in Cavan. There are a few branches of Rileys, but mostly, again, Breffni, Cavan. Now, speaking of the Sullivan, I have at the top there, that is a photostat of something I took from the book that I'll give you at the end, a source book for yourself and myself and others, a major book. That's how it appears. But the name is not Sullivan at all. So the Sullivans in Longford, for the most part, are descendants from O'Sullivan. And the Irish for Sullivan is O'Sullivan. So people listening to it say, I think they're saying Sullivan. You can't make it out. But it's wrong. And only once in Longford did I meet a man who said, we had neighbours up the road. They were called Sullivan, all right, but we always called them Sulahans. From the Irish language, you see. It's forgotten. So that's anglicisation for you. Where do we get our Longford names? There are several associated with Longford. Leitrim, Longford, Westmeath, that group of counties. The Victories, not many of them around, but they're the MacNabos. From the Gaelic, Macnabua. Somebody thought that the word at the end of Macnabua, mistranslated, by the way, was victory. Berbua. Vian Bua Age. We had the victory. Gerrity and Gearty, Mac-Iruchtig. That's, again, a common enough name here and elsewhere in the Midlands. McInerney, Clare name associated with Clare, County Clare. But you find it all over the country, in fact. And it's Nerney here in Longford, and Nertony even. And in Offaly, I came across a form, Kinarney, A-I-N-N-A-R-N, an anglicised form of Macanarnig. Arhanach is a person who is a legal officer looking after church lands, and they were held a very important position. And there were Archanig people in every corner of Ireland. Rawl, not many Rawls, but they're there as Rehal and different spellings. That's O'Reil or O'Reil, and do different spellings, possibly two different clans. But I thought I'd show you the form. Gilulis or Gilhuli, that is, again, Machgulagula. What the Gula part means, who knows? Some people said it's an old word for glutton. Others say, to do with shoulder. Why? I don't know why they were named that. It's a sept of the Mulvis, whom you've heard of, Leitrim and Longford. Gunshinan, again, you hear of the Gunshinans, different spellings of the name in English form, and it's from the Irish Macunshinan, and it's a corruption of the Gaelic name of Gilsinen, believe it or not, local. A name you won't find in any of the books, but I discussed it with Father John Quinn, a great Gaelic scholar, a man of music, a musicologist, and we come up with some ideas, but he eventually tumbled on it. He said there was a saint, an old abbot of a place near Clonmacnoise, and his name was Aravik, Aravach, and O'Haravik is Harvey in Leitrim, by the way. But in Longford, it's O'Muel Arava, and the spellings, of course, in English, there they are at the bottom, Malervi, Malervi, Melervi. And some other names now from Longford, Comiskey, or as somebody would call them in America, Comiskey, and we're Polish. No, Mac Comiskey from Longford. That's where the name is from, Westmeath, Longford. Gilna, two different spellings. Mac Gilnanoiv, the son of the servant of the saints. So a very holy person indeed. Mimna, or Minna, sometimes Muina. General Phil Sheridan, a great American Civil War general, his mother was a Muina from Cavan. And McGeoys and McGoys, that's also in the north of Ireland found as Magahi and Macahy, and it's from Macachig, Ach being a steed. So a person to do with steeds, a horse person, but who would know? Monaghan, well, O'Muelachine is one Gaelic form of the name, and another one is O'Muhaline, or Mullachine, I should say. Some fanciful ideas. I like the Comiskey business. One time I got a phone call from a man whose name was Tom, and he said he was coming over to give my wife a quote for some tiling she wanted done in the house. And I said to him, are you, Tom, are you from Donegal? And he said, oh, I am, he said. And I said, what's your surname? He said, Horisky. I said, and where in Donegal? Oh, Gartha Hork, he said. I said, that's where my mother's people are from. Ta Gaelic Agat Sir Martin. And we spoke in Irish because he was a Gaelic speaker. That's where they still speak Gaelic. My cousins all speak Gaelic there today, speak Irish. And the name is O'Furishke, became Horisky, sometimes Horisky. And given a respectable English name, Waters, two different spellings there. Another man I met one time said, Ducey, my name is, John or Phil or whatever, Ducey, D-U-C-I-E. Yeah, we think we're French, the form of the name D-C-I-E. No, it's O'Duasa, and it's from Waterford, Tipperary. And I had a colleague in RTE days, and his name was Ducey, a man who worked in sound operations. Ducey, they're the different spellings of it. So it's Irish. Costello is not Italian. Costella, you hear it called most often abroad. I hear them all the time. There's a sportsman on the BBC radio called Costello, but they're Costello. Costello, Makostelov, or Makostela, son of Ostela. It's a name that was assumed by the Norman family of Gilbert de Nangle. Who he was doesn't matter, but they became that. The Normans did that sometimes. The MacWilliams were all Burkes, for example. MacLean. Earliest Anglo-Irish Mac surnames recorded in the annals of 1193. That's where that piece was found. Another name that is confused as being something exotic like French, Argue. Not a common name, but it's there. And if you notice that sign I have is on the plaque outside the lawyer's door. Famous name went around the world, Argue and Fibs. A firm of solicitors, they're Argue and Fibs. Argue is, again, a Cavan name, mostly, or Leitrim, it was nearby. And there's a little village that we pass through on our way up to Donegal sometimes on the road called Killarriga, or Killarrigue. Irish people don't say, he'd argue with you all the time, argue. It's Killarrigue. And the name is Farragut, a saint, and his shrine and old ruins of an old monastery of St. Farragut is in that village. Most people go through it very quickly because it's not very big. So how do we get our names and where from? Well, just summarizing it, personal names, Donacha, Moracha, and so on, Niel, O'Neill, and so on. From animals, nicknames, occupations of one kind or another. From colours, all the Irish names that have down or dun, dove or du, bui, film, rua, all these names. Traits and characteristics, that's how people were named. And place of origin, that's a toponymic, wherever they came from, the name of a place. Derby, for example, people called Derbys. And also, many of them I showed you already, saints and sacred names, lots of that. So the Smiths, for example, McGowan, all the Smiths in Cavan, and almost all the Smiths in Ireland, almost inevitably, they are McGowan. The Irish word for Smith, Gowa or Goa, depends what dialect you're using, Goa, McGowan. The Nelsons, Nielsons, and MacNails are all from the name MacNeil, And that's, look what happens to our name. My name is Nelson. Yeah, we're English. You might be, but you might not be. Gantley, Ganley, and Shanley, all the same name. Mac Hanliuch. That's named after a man's trade, which was that of an old warrior. Shanliuch. Shanliuch. Kilduff, Gilduff, and Mackelduff. There's your black. Mac Gildruv, the son of the dark or black person. Who that person was, we don't know. McGilloway. I went to school with a McGilloway one time, and Ken McGilloway. And another form of the name is McKelvey, from the Irish form, Macgillowee or Macgillowee. So it can be Macgillowee or Macgillowee. Viking names, Norse names, I mentioned that already. The Doyles, of course. McKittrick, that's from Citric. He was a main Norseman in Dublin one time. Aspirate the S and you get McKittrick, and that's what it takes. Macaulay or Awley, that's the son of Olive, Scottish Gaelic name and an Irish Gaelic name. McManus, McManish, Norse. McSorley, Sorlia or Sorlia. Cotter, McIchit, and so on. There are many of these, not many, but there are more of these names. People from Britain in the 12th century, the Anglo-Normans, Barry and the Bora. Burke, Butler, Fitzgerald. Of course, the Fitzgeralds, like the others, became Gaelicized. They were the MacGarrish. Garrett Moore Fitzgerald, you heard about him. Garrett Og, his son. Fitzgerald. Roach, of course, the Rochte. Lacey, De Lacey, Nugents, Pettits around the Midlands. Tute, again. Taff, Tyrrell, and so on. There are many others. Now, here's an interesting bunch. This is a little aside. All those who are named after holy men of the cloth, MacIntaggart, sometimes just Taggart, Sagart being priest, from the Latin sacerdos or sacerdos, Sagart. Macanespi, Aspuk, the son of the bishop. What was he up to? Well, anyway. Macafarson, the son of the parson. Macavani, son of the monk. I met a man in charge of a monastery one time, and his name was Macavani. I said, that's a great name for your good self, the son of a monk, and you are a monk. Mac Vicar, Macan Vicare. Vicars, sometimes another short form. Could be Scottish, or, of course, the Mac Vicar is Scottish and Gaelic, Irish Gaelic. McCleary, Mac an Cléric, son of the clergyman. Dean and Dagany, or Dagani, or I'm not sure how they pronounce it, very unusual form there, but that's the son of the dean. I should tell you that the Irish names can have fun. This is another little digression, but just a bit of a smile. I came across a conference, a history conference in Galway 2010, where the guest speaker was Professor Michael Laffin, and there was a representative from the Galway history group called Father Gerard Cryan. So at the top table at one stage, one man was Laffin and the other man was Cryan. And when I was asked to speak to a history group in Kilkenny one time, a woman called Laffin asked me to do the job, and I told her this one. She said, "Oh, I've heard that." She says, and we had our own version of it. My brother was best man at a wedding. He was, Joe or John Laffin, and the bridesmaid was Cryan. So the best man was Laffin, the bridesmaid was Cryan. Oh dear, there are others of these. I collect them, and some of them are not quite polite either, but that's another thing. To finish up with, these are your sources. If you want to find out about any of the names, Slinche, Gael, Isgaul, Irish names and surnames. If you Google Irish names and surnames, that book is online. And it's very helpful, very useful. Again, it helps if you have the Irish language, because the names come in the Irish form. And the Surnames of Ireland, Edward McLysaght, a paperback. Well worth getting. So, that's it. There's a lot more I could tell you, but I think I've given you enough already, and I hope you got something out of it, and it was a pleasure bringing it to you.